They called her Minty, though no one on the plantation remembered why. She worked in the laundry house beside the river, where steam rose like ghosts, and the smell of lye burned the inside of her nose until she couldn't taste anything else. Minty never talked back, never raised her voice, never once looked a white person in the eyes. She moved quiet as fog and worked faster than anyone else. Even the overseer said she had laundry hands, thin, quick, and made for scrubbing. But there was one thing nobody knew about her. Minty could read chemicals better than she could read people. She knew which mixtures ate cloth, which ones bleached bone, which ones burned skin so deep it left a scream stuck in the throat. And she knew exactly what 12 men did every Thursday night when they gathered in hoods and robes, their breaths thick with whiskey and hatred. She knew because they bragged aloud, thinking she was deaf, dumb, or too broken to listen. But Minty listened, Minty remembered, Minty planned. And one summer night when those 12 men carried their robes to the wash house and dropped them at her feet, Minty touched the fabric, smelled the sweat and smoke, and made her choice. Not revenge, not justice, something far older, something taught to her by her grandmother in the marshes of Carolina, whispered under moonlight. If they shed blood, child, you make the water remember that night. The water did, and so did Minty. The men arrived just past sundown, their horses snorting, their boots dragging the dirt like they were ashamed to walk clean. The cicadas went silent when the first hooded rider approached the wash house. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Minty was bent over a wooden basin, arms deep in soapy water, scrubbing a slip belonging to the mistress. Her wrists were raw, her nails worn to half their length. Sweat dripped into the basin, making the soap sting. She did not react when she heard footsteps behind her. Martha, a voice slurred. It was Jeb Randall, overseer and drunk most nights. He always forgot Minty's name. We got more sheets for you. Minty kept her eyes down. Another man spoke, voice sharp as a blade. Not sheets, robes. Minty's fingers froze in the water. She knew that voice. Peter Langston, plantation owner's cousin, self-proclaimed defender of white honor. The man who once bragged he could smell a Negro thought before it forms. There were 10 more behind him. She heard the shifting, the smug laughter, the careless pride in their voices. They dropped a burlap sack beside her, heavy, damp, and smelling of smoke. Jeb nudged it with his boot. Filthy work this week. Got ash, pitch, blood. Don't ask whose. Minty didn't. She already knew. Her grandmother used to say blood had a smell that clung to the living longer than the dead. Minty straightened slowly, lifting the burlap sack with both hands. It nearly toppled her. It was heavier than she expected, but she held steady. Behind the men, the moon hung swollen and yellow like it was watching. Peter Langston leaned in too close. You make 'em clean, girl. White as Sunday church. Minty nodded once. He smirked. And don't ruin anything. These robes cost money. She looked at the cloth peeking through the sack. White cotton, stiff and crisp, stained with things she didn't want to think about. Minty whispered, barely audible, "Yes, sir." The men rode off, laughing as they went. Minty waited until their voices faded like dying echoes before she moved. She dragged the sack inside the wash house, bolted the door, and lit a lantern. Inside the sack, 12 robes waited, stinking of fear, rage, sweat, and whatever they had done out in the woods. She touched one with 2 fingers. Her palm tingled. Her grandmother's voice rose in the back of her mind. Water remembers, lye punishes, and fire freezes. Minty breathed in, steadying herself. She had been waiting for this moment since the winter the Klan dragged her brother Josiah from his bed and left him hanging from the oak near the pig pens. She had been waiting since the day they doused the midwife's cabin in kerosene and lit it like a lantern. She had been waiting since she was old enough to understand that no one was coming to save them except themselves. Minty tied her apron tighter. She reached under the wash basin and pulled out a small clay jar sealed with wax. She had spent weeks making the mixture inside, lye stronger than anything used for washing, enhanced with sap that clung to skin, with crushed hornet's nests, with the ground root her grandmother called screaming weed. She opened the jar. The fumes rose like invisible claws, scraping her throat. Minty did not cough. She dipped her cloth into the poison and began rubbing it into the inner seams of the first robe, humming under her breath. To keep steady, the hum was an old melody, a Wharton song. With each stroke she whispered, "For Josiah, for the midwife, for the babies they took, for the women they cursed." The lantern flickered. The river outside churned. By the time she reached the 12th robe, Minty's hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was doing. She folded each robe carefully, as gently as a mother might fold a child's blanket. Then she placed them on the drying rack and opened the windows to let the night air in. The moon was high, the river was restless, and Minty, quiet, small, invisible Minty, stood at the door of the wash-house with her hands clasped in front of her. 12 robes, 12 men, 12 fates sealed. She whispered into the wind, "Let the water remember." And the wind whispered back. The plantation yard held a stillness that night that didn't feel natural, too thick, too deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. Marjorie moved quietly between the drying lines, feeling the cool damp of the night pressing against her skin. The moon was hidden behind low clouds, giving her the cover she needed. She had finished scrubbing the last of the robes earlier that day, leaving them stiff, bone-white, and lie-taut as always. No one suspected a thing then, but now she wasn't here to wash, she was here to take. 12 robes hung in a perfect row, ghostly shapes swaying slightly in the night breeze. Even in the dark, she could recognize each one by the length, the small mended tears, the way the hood was cut. She had spent years knowing these robes better than the men who wore them. Her hands did not shake. She was long past shaking. She reached up and took the first off the line, folding it over her forearm with a care that would make any mistress proud if only they knew. One by one she removed them, silently, deliberately, each soft whoosh of fabric coming free sounding like a whispered yes. She didn't smile, not yet, but her chest was full like she had swallowed a rising storm. Marjorie carried the robes through the back of the laundry shed and opened the trap door beneath the storage crates. Nobody knew about the old root cellar except her and the rats. She lowered the robes inside, closed the hatch, and slid the crates back into place. Then she stood still and listened. Crickets, wind through pine, a horse snorting somewhere near the barn. No footsteps, no overseer's drunken ramble, no boots pounding the ground. She exhaled slowly. This was the first step. She had many more to take. By morning, the yard was chaos. "Where the hell are the robes?" Mr. Rick, the overseer, bellowed so loudly that even the trees seemed to flinch. He stormed through the drying area, kicking baskets, knocking down lines, sending freshly washed linen splashing into puddles. Slaves scattered away, each trying to look busy, invisible, innocent. Marjorie kept her head down as she scrubbed a shirt at the basin. The water sloshed, frothy with lye, but her hands moved with perfect calm. Rick's shadow fell across her, long and furious. "Girl," he snarled, "you was the one washed them robes last, wasn't you?" "Yes, sir," she answered lightly, not looking up. "And you hung 'em here last night?" "Yes, sir, just where I always do." "Then you tell me how 12 sacred robes vanish into thin air." He slammed his boot into the barrel beside her, sending water splashing across her skirt. The other slaves flinched. Marjorie didn't. "I don't know, sir," she said simply. "Maybe the wind took 'em." A few of the slaves nearby choked on their breath, covering the sound quickly. Rick stared at her, nostrils flaring, but she kept her eyes on the fabric under her hands. Quiet, steady, harmless. She could almost feel the heat boiling off him. "You find them robes before sundown," he growled, stabbing a finger inches from her face. Marjorie kept scrubbing, long after he stalked away.
her movements slow, thoughtful.
When the yard finally settled and the men rode out searching, she allowed herself a small smile. Not joy, not triumph, preparation. Because the plan wasn't just to take their robes, she intended to return them. At the worst possible moment that afternoon, Marjorie slipped away to the root cellar. She opened the trap door, and the smell of dry cloth and old earth rose up to meet her. She lifted the first robe and held it to the light. It looked harmless, innocent, purified, exactly the way they wanted to appear. Marjorie's fingers traced the cloth, remembering the screams she had heard from behind closed doors, the fires they set, the boys they hunted for sport, the woman they dragged across the yard like an animal, every stain she had ever scrubbed, every lie that robe had covered. Her eyes hardened. She took out the small pouch she had hidden earlier, filled with the lye paste she had boiled thick, far stronger than any batch she ever used for laundry. She had let it sit for days until it reached the perfect lethal burn. With slow, careful movements, she rubbed the paste along the inside collars, cuffs, and hems, where skin would touch first, where sweat would activate it, where the burning would be sharpest. She worked in silence, not rushed, not shaking. This wasn't revenge done in rage. It was a washing, a cleansing, a return of what had always belonged to them. When she finished all 12 robes, she folded them neatly, almost reverently, and laid them inside the shed so they would seem freshly dropped, found by chance. The sun was setting. The men would return soon, tired, angry, humiliated, and eager to reclaim their symbols of power, exactly as she intended. Because tomorrow night the Klan would meet, and they would wear their robes with pride, and the lie would meet their skin. And the next scream Marjorie heard would not belong to the innocent. It would belong to the men who believed she was nothing but a girl who washed clothes, a girl whose hands were meant only to scrub, a girl who would never dare bite back. She paused, closing the shed door softly behind her. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the wind, "you gon' feel me." The next evening arrived with an uneasy heat, thick, humid, clinging to the air like sweat on a frightened brow. Even the sky seemed tense, streaked with bruised clouds that hovered low as if watching. The men gathered near the oak grove, whispering in harsh, restless tones. They were irritated from the long day of searching, their pride bruised, their tempers short. And yet, when word spread that the robes had been found, the mood shifted instantly. "See? Weren't no thief," one muttered. "Told y'all, probably fell behind the shed." "God's providence," another man said smugly, patting his pistol. Marjorie watched from the laundry yard as they collected the robes, folded neatly where she left them, exactly where they could pretend nothing embarrassing had ever happened. Power didn't like looking foolish, and tonight pride mattered more than suspicion. She saw Mr. Reich inspect one robe, sniff it, rub the fabric between his fingers, and frown for a moment. Only a moment. "Smells strong," he muttered. "Lye, ain't it?" another man asked. "It's laundry, ain't it?" Reich snapped. "Of course it smells like lye. Girl probably just scrubbed him hard trying to cover her mistake." They all laughed. Marjorie kept her face down, though her heart hammered in her chest, not with fear, but with something harder, sharper. The first step of her plan was done. Now came the second. When the last robe disappeared into the grove, she slipped around the back of the shed. She couldn't get close, not without being seen, so she found a crack in the fence and pressed her eye to it. She could see flickers of torchlight through the trees, the faint glow of their gathering, and she waited. The robes went on just after sundown. Marjorie knew the moment by the sound, the dry rustle of 12 hoods sliding over hair, the low hum of satisfaction in the men's voices. It was a sound she'd heard many times, always before something awful, something whispered about for years afterward. But tonight, the ritual turned strange. The first grunt was soft, barely audible, just a throat clearing maybe. Then came a second one, sharper, followed by a hiss. What the? My neck's burning. Mine, too, feels like ants, hellfire. Marjorie held her breath, her fingers dug into the rough wood of the fence. A man cursed loudly, another yelped. One tore off his hood and clawed at the inside seam, his nails scraping raw cotton. Did you wash these things with acid? Marjorie smiled slowly, not fully, just at the edges. Another man ripped off his robe entirely, stumbling backward. The skin around his collarbone blistered instantly, angry, red, already peeling. The lie, awakened by sweat and heat, was doing exactly what she'd prepared it to do. "It's the damn lie," one shouted. "It's eating me." The grove erupted, not with chanting, not with fire lighting the night, but with shrieks, real shrieks. 12 grown men scrambling, rolling, tearing cloth, slapping at their own skin like it was alive. Marjorie had seen pain before. She had heard it in many forms. But this was panic wrapped in justice. Panic that didn't hide behind hoods and shadows. Panic that knew it deserved every flame licking its skin. Reich howled louder than any of them. "My arms, Lord, my arms!" He fell to his knees, robe half off, tugging desperately at the tight sleeves. The lie had soaked into the bends of his elbows, where sweat pulled the worst. His skin blistered open, raw and weeping. He looked like a man being peeled. The others were no better. They knocked each other down, tripped over roots, rolled in dirt, trying to stop the burn. Torchlight shook wildly as men flailed blindly, some near fainting, some vomiting from the pain. Marjorie's breath left her chest in one long, steady exhale. It was happening. It was really happening, and no one had even touched them. They had put the burn on themselves. She pulled back from the fence. Her knees felt weak, not from fear, but from something like stunned relief. A weight she'd carried for years felt suddenly lighter. The screams drifted through the night, echoing over the fields, swallowed by the trees, but not by her memory. For once, she wasn't the one listening helplessly. She was the one who set the stage. She walked back toward the laundry yard, calm, deliberate. The night wind cooled her skin, carrying the faint scent of pine and the harsher edge of pain. She sat by the wash basin, rinsed her hands, and waited. After nearly half an hour, the grove went quiet, suspiciously quiet. The kind of quiet that meant exhaustion had replaced panic. The kind of quiet that meant some wounds were no longer screaming. They were simply burning. Marjorie's jaw tightened. They weren't dead, not yet. The lie was brutal, but it wouldn't kill them unless it reached their eyes or they rubbed it into open flesh. But tonight wasn't about killing, not yet. Tonight was about the first crack in their armor. The first moment they learned fear wasn't a one-way street. And as she stood wiping her hands on her apron, she whispered to the dark, "This ain't the end. This just the wash cycle." Then she faded into the shadows, leaving the grove filled with groaning men who had once thought themselves untouchable. They weren't anymore. Not one of them. By dawn, the plantation stirred like a wounded animal. The chickens were silent. The dogs paced anxiously, and not a single white man emerged from the big house to bark orders. The silence was wrong, unnerving. The other slaves sensed it instantly. They exchanged wary glances while pretending to go about their work, their hands slow and careful. Marjorie kept her head down, but inside she felt the air shift like a storm rolling toward shore. The 12 men were still in the oak grove when the sun rose, collapsed in scattered heaps. Someone finally had the sense to send for the doctor, and word traveled fast. 12 men burned raw through their robes, skin peeling, eyes swollen, blood mixed with soot. By mid-morning, the doctor's buggy rattled across the yard. He looked exhausted before he even stepped down, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already stained red.
He didn't walk toward the big house. He walked straight toward the grove, and that alone told a story. Marjorie lingered near the water pump. She didn't dare get closer, but she turned her ear toward the trees. The doctor's voice rose in disbelief, carrying clearly. "What in God's holy name did you clowns do? This is chemical burn, bad as anything I seen in the war." Rick's voice followed, ragged, desperate. It was the robes. Something was wrong with them. The doctor snapped back. "You telling me laundry soap did this? Girl washed them herself?" Someone else wheezed. "She put something in it. She had to." Ah, there it was. Blame, predictable as roosters crowing. But Marjorie didn't flinch, not even when the word girl turned sharp, ugly, and suspicious. Because she knew what the doctor would say, and he did. "You idiots," he barked. "No slave girl caused this. This is lye buildup, mixed with sweat and heat, fabric over-scrubbed, not rinsed properly. You wore them too long. Your own bodies activated the burn. Not witchcraft, not sabotage, neglect." The grove went silent. Men who had screamed through the night now sat stiff as gravestones. Rick spat bitterly. "So you're saying it's our fault?" The doctor sighed. "I'm saying you're fools, and you're lucky you aren't blind." Marjorie felt something like vindication flicker low in her chest. Not triumph, not yet.
But vindication. These men were so wrapped in their own arrogance, they couldn't imagine the universe punishing them without a human hand behind it. But punishment didn't need hands. It just needed a spark. When the doctor finally left the grove, his buggy wheels crunching over dirt, the men argued among themselves. Low at first, then louder. "Girl did this. I seen her scrubbing too long. No girl could plan a thing like this. Why were the robes lost in the first place? Maybe someone moved them. Maybe she hid them. She ain't dumb. Don't trust the quiet ones." The words crawled through the plantation like insects, slipping under doors, into kitchens, between laundry lines. They grew teeth. By noon, every slave knew what the men were whispering. Marjorie didn't react. She kept folding sheets. The sun hot on her neck, her face blank, her posture perfect. Inside, a coil tightened. She had expected suspicion. She had also expected fear, and she wasn't wrong. Before sundown, 3 white men limped into the laundry yard. Their faces were bandaged, their arms wrapped, their eyes bloodshot. They looked half human, half scorched, but their anger, raw and trembling, was unmistakable. Marjorie didn't lift her eyes. She kept scrubbing a tablecloth. One man kicked over a basket. Another seized her arm. "You do this?" he growled. "Sir," she whispered, as meekly as years of survival had taught her. "Did you put something in them robes?" She let a tremor into her voice. Not because she feared him, but because she needed him to believe she did. "No, sir, just scrubbed like Mrs. said. I don't know nothing else." The men glared at each other. "That's the thing," one spat. "She too dumb to do something like this." Marjorie almost smiled. Almost. "Boss says it was our sweat," the first man grumbled. "Says it was us done it to ourselves." The second scoffed. "Sweat don't melt skin." She kept her head bowed, but she listened. Fear, she realized, hadn't just begun. It was already growing legs. The third man, silent until now, leaned close. His breath smelled like blood and whiskey. "You listen, girl. If something else strange happens, we'll come back." Then they limped away, leaving her alone with the overturned basket and the scent of their bandages, burned flesh mixed with ointment. Marjorie knelt, picking up the scattered laundry, one piece at a time. Her hands didn't shake, her breathing didn't falter, but her eyes, hidden by her hair, sharpened with purpose. This was not setback. This was stage setting, because now they were watching her. And men who watched her weren't watching their robes, or their routines, or their food, or their secrets.
Fear made people sloppy. Sloppy people made mistakes, and mistakes made opportunity. When the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, Marjorie whispered to herself, "If they think this was punishment, wait till they see judgment." She rinsed her hands one final time, dried them on her apron, and looked toward the grove where the men had screamed through the night. 12 of them burned, 12 of them afraid. 12 chances to choose which would fall first, and she would choose. After all, she had already washed their robes. Now she would wash their souls. The plantation settled into an uneasy quiet over the next 2 days. Quiet, but not calm. The 12 burned men lurked around the grounds in bandages, their pride as blistered as their skin. Their anger simmered, but their fear simmered louder. That was the part Marjorie counted on. Fear made a man fold in on himself. Fear made him suspicious. Fear made him weak. All she needed was weakness. The chance arrived sooner than she expected. The first man to falter was Caleb Ransom, a loud-mouthed overseer's nephew whose temper had always been sharper than his wit. He'd been the one who grabbed her arm, the one who said sweat didn't melt skin, the one who whispered threats with bandage-wrapped cheeks still stinging from burns. Caleb had always strutted like he owned the place, but after the burns, he walked differently. He flinched when dogs barked. He avoided the grove altogether. And most importantly, he drank heavily. By the third night, he was staggering back to the bunkhouse long after sundown, reeking of corn whiskey. The other overseers didn't try to help him. They were too wrapped in their own pain and suspicion.
Marjorie noticed from the laundry yard that evening. She watched him weave in between the cabins, carrying a half-empty jug. His bandages were stained yellow and damp from sweat. His movements sloppy. He didn't see her. Men like him never saw anything they considered beneath them. Perfect. That night in the dark belly of the laundry cabin, Marjorie prepared. She didn't have poison. She didn't need it. What she had was something far simpler, something she learned from the old women on the sea islands. A mixture of crushed tobacco, lye residue scraped from the wash barrels, and a pinch of soot from the fireplace. Not deadly in small amounts, but to someone whose pace was already raw, whose burns were still open, whose body was fighting infection, it would be enough. She wrapped the powder in a scrap of cloth and tucked it into her apron. Then she waited. The chance came the next morning. Caleb arrived at the laundry yard before breakfast, wheezing and sweating. The heat touched him harder than the others. The burns had robbed his skin of its ability to handle sun. He stood wobbling, looking at her as if he didn't quite see her. "Water," he rasped. Marjorie turned to the pump. "Yes, sir." She filled a tin cup. As she turned back, the cloth packet in her apron brushed her hip. She slipped her thumb into it. A light touch, a small pinch. The powder slid into the water, dissolving instantly. She handed the cup to Caleb. He drained it, desperate, gulping like a man whose body was begging for moisture. Marjorie lowered her eyes as though in servitude, but inside, her heartbeat remained steady. She didn't need to watch him drink. She knew. The reaction came fast, faster than she expected. By midday, Caleb was sweating through his bandages. By afternoon, he was trembling. The other overseers thought it was the infection spreading from his facial burns. No one suspected the quiet girl who folded sheets just a few yards away. When he finally collapsed outside the stables, he hit the ground with a dull thud. Shouts erupted. "Get the doctor! He can't breathe! His face, God Almighty, look at it!" Marjorie didn't move from her wash barrel. She just listened. And when the doctor came rushing again, already exhausted from tending to the others, his voice rang out clear enough for her to hear every word. "This man's burns are infected. His body's reacting. How long has he been drinking like this? He's dehydrated, fevered. And these bandages, good Lord, they're soaked with filth." He ripped them away. Caleb screamed. Marjorie closed her eyes for a moment, not in sympathy, but in acknowledgement. It had begun. By nightfall, Caleb was dead. The plantation sank into a deeper silence, heavier than before. 12 burned, 1 gone,
11 left. Whispers crept through the slave quarters like cold fingers. Ain't no way that man died natural. Ah, Cole. Maybe it was punishment. Maybe the law took him. Maybe that girl knows something. Marjorie kept her face blank, her hands busy, her voice low and unassuming. That was her power. Not invisibility, but the illusion of it. The white men didn't suspect her because suspicion required imagination. They had none. But the enslaved people, they watched her differently. Not fearfully, not accusingly, curiously, respectfully, quietly, hopeful. Word traveled fast among them, though never directly. Someone muttered, "Caleb shouldn't have grabbed her arm." Someone else whispered, "Sometimes God's justice wears strange hands." But no one confronted her, no one asked, no one told. In the world she lived in, silence was the greatest shield of all. That night, as she wrung out a set of blood-stained shirts, Marjorie spoke under her breath soft enough that only the night air heard. One down. She rinsed her hands slowly, deliberately, watching the water whirl down the drain. 11 to go. And for the first time since she'd mixed that lye barrel powder, she smiled. Caleb's death changed the plantation, but not the way the overseers expected. They didn't grow cautious. They didn't reconsider their cruelty. They grew paranoid, and paranoia made them reckless. The 11 surviving Klansmen moved through the yard like men stalked by shadows. Every whisper a threat, every footstep a ghost. They drank more, slept less, watched each other with suspicion, as if any one of them could be next. Marjorie watched it all from the laundry cabin door, her arms folded, her posture humble, her mind sharp as scissors.
Fear wasn't just a weapon. Fear was a leash, and they had willingly looped it around their necks. 3 days after Caleb was lowered into the ground, a strange tension settled over the plantation. The men refused to walk alone. They carried pistols tucked into their belts. They started sleeping in the same bunkhouse, windows locked, lamps burning through the night. They believed a curse had taken root. They weren't entirely wrong. On the 4th night, their leader, Clayton Bryce, announced it was time to reclaim order. That meant only one thing: a meeting, a secret one, a hooded one. Marjorie learned about it the same way she learned most things on that land, by listening silently to things said loudly by men who thought nothing of her presence. "They'll gather in the grove tonight," whispered an older, her hands shaking as she folded blankets. "Those fools are terrified. They gon' try to summon courage the only way they know, through hate." Marjorie dipped her chin. She didn't say a word, but something cold moved inside her chest. Not dread, not fear, preparation. The grove was theirs, but the robes, those were hers. As dusk settled, Marjorie returned to the laundry cabin, locking the door behind her. The stillness felt sacred, dangerous, electric. One by one, she pulled down the 11 remaining hoods. The same ones she had washed, whitened, and hung on the line the day Caleb died. The same robes the men now believed had cursed them. They weren't wrong about that either. She laid them out on the long wooden table. Her fingertips drifted over the fabric, pausing at seams and folds. Then she began her work. Not with lye this time, not poison, not needles slipped into hems. This time, she worked with what she knew best: habits, patterns, human nature. She snipped a small slit into each hood just above the eyes, just subtle enough that a man in darkness would notice only too late. She loosened the ties around the necks, ensuring the hoods would fall forward with the slightest tug. She sewed a tiny patch inside each one, a patch treated with a mixture she had hidden for years, a blend of ground pepper, soot, and dried kudzu vine that caused violent coughing fits when inhaled. Nothing deadly, just distracting, blinding, confusing. She didn't want to kill them in the grove. She wanted them blind and stumbling in the dark, while she watched. When she finished, she folded the robes neatly, stacked them by size, and waited. The men entered just after sunset, 11 of them, bandaged, bruised, on edge. Clayton Bryce led them in,
his voice low and trembling with forced authority. "Get your hoods. We ride tonight." The men shuffled toward the table. Marjorie stood by the corner, head bowed, hands tucked behind her apron. The firelight cast long shadows across her face.
Shadows that made her eyes look deeper than they were. Not one man thanked her. Not one looked at her twice. Perfect. They grabbed their assigned hoods. Clayton snatched his with an irritated grunt. "Next time, girl, wash these sooner. They smell like smoke." Her lips twitched, but she kept her voice soft. "Yes, sir." He never realized she wasn't agreeing. She was promising. Within minutes, the men left the cabin, hoods tucked under their arms, pistols shining under the lantern glow. When they disappeared into the dark path toward the grove, Marjorie slipped out the back door. Quiet, invisible, swift, she took the narrow trail through the cane fields, the shortcut only field hands and night walkers knew. It allowed her to reach the grove long before the horses did. She climbed into the split trunk of a massive cypress tree and crouched inside the hollow. Through a natural gap in the bark, she had a perfect view of the clearing, a perfect vantage point to watch the night unfold. The first signs of trouble came exactly as she anticipated. Clayton Bryce pulled on his hood. The loosened ties slipped. The hood sagged into his eyes. What the? He yanked at it. The hood didn't lift. It tightened. Another man coughed violently. He hacked. "Something's hacked burn in my eyes." A third stumbled, tripping over a root he couldn't see. Chaos bloomed like wildfire. 11 men, blinded by their own hatred-made uniforms, stumbled into each other, clutching at their necks and faces, gasping for air. Voices rose, panicked, confused, choking. Clayton clawed at his hood, his voice muffled. "Someone did this. Someone tampered." Another man hissed back, paranoid and trembling. "You think it was one of us?" Marjorie smiled inside the tree's hollow. Not yet, she thought. Not yet. Let them wonder. Let them question. Let them tear themselves apart. Tonight wasn't the night for their deaths. Tonight was the night they learned fear had a face, and she was watching them through the trees. After several minutes of blind chaos, they ripped off the hoods and hurled them to the ground, coughing and snarling. Clayton kicked his robe into the dirt. No more hoods, not tonight. His men nodded, ashamed, shaken, and most importantly, fractured. They rode out of the grove with no ceremony, no unity, no confidence. Their strength had cracked. Marjorie watched them go, her breathing steady, her gaze unwavering. When the last horse was gone, she stepped out from the cypress and walked into the center of the clearing. She picked up the nearest hood, shook the dust off gently, and folded it over her arm. Then another and another. She gathered all 11 because she wasn't finished, not even close. As she walked back toward the laundry cabin, the moonlight brushed her face, catching the faint curl of her lips. 2 down, she whispered, 10 to go. The night wind carried the words softly. The grove listened. The sun had barely slipped behind the trees when the plantation began to hum with anticipation. Tonight was not just any gathering. It was a cleansing, as the robed men called it, a meeting of the Klan wrapped in pompous secrecy and the sickly sweetness of violence. They strutted like gods, believing their white sheets made them untouchable, holy, chosen. But tonight, those sheets held death, and only one person knew it. Clara watched from the laundry shed doorway as they gathered, the pale glow of lanterns flickering across their masked faces. She recognized their voices, Mr. Brayson, Deputy Cole, the preacher whose sermons dripped hatred like honey, and others whose footsteps she had memorized through years of servitude. They joked, they bragged, they sharpened tools meant for terror, and all the while they wore the robes she had washed. Robes that were now stiffening in the night air as lye quietly burned through cotton threads. Clara felt her stomach knot, not from regret, but from the terrifying possibility that her plan might fail. She had seen the lie's power, seen how quickly it heated,
how ruthlessly it peeled flesh when applied in strong concentration. But these men were monsters, and monsters sometimes survived what humans could not. She whispered to herself, "Let it work, let it work, let it work." Inside the barn they used as a meeting hall, the men formed a circle. Their leader, a tall figure with a decorated mask, raised his gloved hands. "Tonight," he declared, "we reclaim this land from the filth that threatens it."
A roar of approval filled the air. Clara's pulse studded in her ears. The robes were dry now, perfectly dry, and the chemical crust hidden in the folds had grown invisible, dormant, waiting. The leader continued, "We are purity, we are strength, we are the fire of righteousness." A hiss, then a scream. The first man jerked backward, clutching at his chest as smoke began to rise from his robe. Another stumbled into him, howling as the fabric around his arms sizzled and split. One clawed at his mask, tearing at the cloth now fused to his cheek. The barn erupted into chaos. Men tumbled into each other, yanking at their robes as their skin blistered beneath the corrosive lye. Masks slipped, revealing faces melting into raw red patches. Gloves dissolved. Some tried to run, but their boots tangled in collapsing hem lengths as the lye ate through seams. Clara stepped back into the shadows. The screams were louder now, hoarse, ragged, animal. The fire lanterns overturned, igniting hay scattered across the floor. Flames climbed the wooden beams. The night swallowed their cries with greedy ease. One man staggered outside, his hands held out in front of him like ruined wings. Flesh dripped from his fingers and ribbons. He fell face first into the dirt. Another tripped after him, rolling to suffocate the burning pain. But the grass only pressed the lye deeper against his skin. Clara did not move. She stood at the edge of the chaos, her face expressionless, her heart pounding in triumph and horror. She had dreamed of this moment, dreamed of justice. But reality was messier, louder, and far more brutal. The smell alone, burning cotton, burning hair, burning skin, wrapped around her like a dark halo. The barn collapsed, sending sparks spiraling into the sky. The night grew quiet. Clara finally turned toward the slave quarters, where faces peeked silently between the slats of wooden shutters. Mothers, fathers, children, men who had been whipped, women who had been dragged into dark rooms, people who had lost every kind of freedom except the one inside their minds. Clara raised her chin. "It's over," she whispered. But deep in her bones, she knew it wasn't. Not yet. The plantation would not stay silent for long. White men did not like losing. They did not like being made fools of. And they certainly did not tolerate rebellion. Someone would come. Someone would look for answers. Clara inhaled the smoke-thick air and straightened her shoulders. Let them come. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid. Morning crept slowly over the plantation, as if even the sun feared what it might find. Smoke still curled from the collapsed barn, rising in thin gray ribbons that wound through the trees like wandering ghosts. The smell lingered, burnt wood, burnt cloth, burnt cruelty. By dawn, word had spread across neighboring farms. The Klan meeting had ended in disaster, half its members dead, the others maimed beyond recognition. They called it an accident, a freak fire, a punishment from God. Every explanation circled the truth without touching it, because the truth was unthinkable to them. A slave girl, a laundry worker, a black woman, with nothing but lie, determination, and grief. No, they could not imagine such a thing. And that was precisely why Clara survived. She moved quietly through the morning light, her face calm, her hands steady. She washed a small bucket of linens, real linens, soft and harmless,
while the white overseers whispered behind trembling lips. They were terrified, though they pretended they weren't. Clara felt their fear like a new kind of air, a breathable air, a clean air. No one dared look her fully in the eye. The plantation owner returned at midday, his face pale, his voice cracking as he shouted orders at terrified men. Someone needed to be blamed. Someone needed to be punished. Someone needed to disappear so the story could stay neat and comfortable. But each time he pointed toward the slave quarters, someone whispered. It wasn't them. They weren't near the barn. They had no reason. They know better. And he believed it, because his arrogance demanded it. Slaves to him were too simple to plot, too timid to rebel, too broken to fight back. It was the biggest lie he ever told himself. 3 days later, the burials were held. Shallow graves, closed coffins, families crying behind lace veils. Clara watched from a distance, not in mourning, not in guilt, but in an unfamiliar, fragile peace.
Each coffin lowered into the ground was a weight lifted from the world. The other slaves watched her differently now. No one spoke a word about what she had done, though many suspected. Their silence wasn't fear. It was respect and something deeper, hope. One night, weeks later, old Mabel approached her with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "For you," she whispered, "for what you gave us." Clara unwrapped it. Inside lay a pair of worn shoes, real shoes, not the scraps she'd always used. Leather cracked but sturdy, fitting, waiting. Mabel squeezed her hand. "When the time comes," she said, "you walk away from here." Clara stared at the shoes, her breath trembling. She had never owned anything that wasn't taken from her. Never had anything meant for her future. "Where would I go?" she asked softly. Mabel smiled, slow and knowing. "Anywhere the sun rises." Weeks turned into months. The plantation changed. The men who once terrorized it were gone or crippled. The overseers were quieter. Work was softer. Fear had turned in on itself and eaten its own masters. And finally, one warm night when the moon rose pale and full, Clara put on the shoes. They fit like they had always belonged to her. She stepped out of her cabin. She didn't look back. No dogs barked. No overseer shouted. No whip cracked. The night opened before her, wide and forgiving. Clara walked through the fields, through the trees, through the lingering echoes of a life she had outgrown. And somewhere behind her, hidden in the dark earth, the robes she had washed, the robes that had once symbolized terror, lay reduced to ash. Clara left the plantation with nothing but 2 good shoes and the knowledge that even the most powerless person carries within them an ember capable of burning down empires. And sometimes that ember becomes a fire that changes everything.